In 1953, South Korea was poorer than Kenya, poorer than Ghana, a nation of ash and rubble with almost nothing left after 3 years of war. 70 years later, that same country builds the world's most advanced memory chips, tops global music charts, and boasts one of the highest incomes on Earth. Economists call this transformation the miracle on the Han River. This is the story of that miracle, and of one ordinary boy named Kim Cheol-su, born the same year the guns fell silent, who lived every chapter of it. When the Korean War ended in 1953, the country's income per person was around $67 a year, among the lowest anywhere in the world. Most people farmed small plots of land and depended on foreign aid just to eat. Few in the world believed this small, divided peninsula would ever amount to much more than a permanent aid recipient. Cheol-su grew up in a small farming village along a tributary of the Han River. His family had no electricity, no paved road, and barely enough rice to last the winter. He remembered his father saying that the only way out of poverty was for the whole country to change at once, not just one family. In 1961, when Cheol-su was 8 years old, General Park Chung-hee seized power in a military coup. At the time, the country's income per person was still under $100 a year. Park's government launched the first 5-year economic development plan in 1962, a state-directed push into roads, electricity, and export factories. Over that plan alone, the economy grew at an average of more than 8% a year. For a boy in a village with no electricity, the plan was an abstraction. But soon, it would reach all the way to his front door. By the late 1960s, Korea's exports were almost laughably humble by today's standards, mostly wigs and simple textiles, worth barely $33 million a year in total back in 1960. At 17, Cheol-su left his village for Seoul, like millions of other rural teenagers, to take a factory job stitching textiles for export. He sent nearly every won he earned back home to his parents. It was hard, repetitive work for long hours and little pay. But for the first time in his family's history, there was steady cash coming in. And steady cash was something entirely new. By the early 1970s, the government's second and third 5-year plans pushed the economy further, from simple textiles into steel, petrochemicals, and machinery. This is when the family-run conglomerates known as chaebol, like Hyundai and Samsung, began taking the shape they still have today. Cheol-su, now in his early 20s, was hired at a growing steelworks outside Seoul. The pay was better than the textile factory, and for the first time, he felt like he was building something permanent. He met a young woman named Soo-jin, who worked in the plant's administrative office. They married in 1977, the same year Korea's income per person finally crossed $1,000 for the first time. Back in Cheol-su's home village, change was arriving too. In April 1970, President Park launched the Saemol-undong, the new village movement, sending free cement and materials to villages willing to build their own roads, bridges, and irrigation. The movement's slogan was simple: diligence, self-help, cooperation. Cheol-su's own parents helped rebuild the village road he had once walked barefoot to catch the bus to Seoul. Within a decade, rural household income had grown more than tenfold. The village Cheol-su grew up in barely looked the same anymore. Through the late 1970s and 1980s, conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG grew from government-favored manufacturers into global brands backed by cheap state-directed credit and aggressive export targets. Cheol-su and Soo-jin now had a son. They moved into a small apartment in a newly built housing block, modest by today's standards, but with something neither of their own childhoods had: running water, electricity, and a television. In Seoul's Gangnam district, once mostly farmland, new apartment towers and land prices were rising fast, a preview of a boom that would eventually need careful managing. In 1988, Seoul hosted the Summer Olympics, a symbolic announcement to the world that Korea was no longer the aid-dependent nation it had been just one generation earlier. Cheol-su, now 35, watched the opening ceremony on his own television, with his son beside him. He thought about the dirt road back home and how far that road and his life had traveled. By the mid-1990s, Korea's income per person had passed $10,000. But underneath the growth, conglomerates had taken on enormous short-term foreign debt, betting the good times would simply continue. In July 1997, a currency crisis starting in Thailand spread across Asia. Foreign investors pulled their money out of Korea. By December, the Korean won had collapsed to nearly 2,000 to the US dollar, roughly half its earlier value. On December 3, 1997, the government signed a rescue deal with the International Monetary Fund, worth about $58 billion, one of the largest bailouts in history. At Cheol-su's company, rumors of layoffs spread fast. In January 1998, Korea's national broadcaster launched an extraordinary campaign. Ordinary citizens were asked to donate their personal gold, wedding rings, children's rings, even Olympic medals, to be melted down and sold abroad to help repay the IMF debt. Cheol-su and Soo-jin, now in their 40s, stood in that line too. They handed over their own wedding rings, the same rings from their wedding in 1977, the year the country first crossed $1,000 a person. By April 1998, roughly 3.5 million Koreans had taken part, donating around 227 tons of gold. It covered only about 10% of the total bailout debt, but it told the world something the balance sheets couldn't. This was a country that would not simply give up. Korea repaid its IMF loans early, in 2001, 3 years ahead of schedule, after forcing painful reforms on its banks and conglomerates. In the decades since, Korea built the world's leading memory chip industry, its shipyards and automakers went fully global, and Korean film, music, and television, K-culture, reached audiences on every continent. By the 2020s, income per person in Korea had passed $34,000, more than a 300-fold increase since Cheol-su was born in the ashes of 1953. Cheol-su's story shows that a genuine economic miracle isn't magic. It's decades of consistent investment in infrastructure, education, and export competitiveness, sustained across multiple governments and generations. But it also carries a warning. Even a real, well-earned boom can turn fragile if debt piles up faster than the reserves needed to weather a shock. Korea's chaebol were genuinely productive companies, yet excessive short-term foreign borrowing nearly brought the whole system down in 1997. The deepest lesson may be the one told through the gold collection campaign. Growth built by an entire society, brick by brick and factory by factory, can also be defended by that same society when a crisis hits, as long as people believe the system is worth saving. Today, the road Cheol-su once walked barefoot to catch a bus to Seoul is paved, lit, and lined with cafes. The river that gave the miracle its name still flows quietly through the middle of one of the world's most advanced cities. What do you think matters more to build lasting growth? Bold government planning or the everyday sacrifices of ordinary people? Leave your thoughts below and subscribe for more true stories from economic history.